The room was pitch dark. A faint sound echoed through the silence, a whisper that almost felt like a breath too close to the ear. But there was no one there. The sharp sound of a door creaking open shattered the quiet, followed by the unmistakable rustle of fabric dragging across the floor. Every instinct screamed to run, but the cold fingers of fear froze them in place. Something was wrong. Something was here. As the seconds bled into one another, the vague shape of a figure appeared in the corner of the room. The way it moved, too fluid, too deliberate, made every hair stand on end. It was watching, waiting. A voice cracked through the tension, faint but unmistakable. "You should have listened." It wasn't a voice they knew, yet it sounded all too familiar. The world tilted, and the sound of their breath seemed the only thing that kept them anchored. But even that began to falter, as if it too feared the truth. In that breathless moment, the world seemed to freeze. The room felt colder, heavier, as though something malevolent had seeped into the very walls. A sound broke the silence, but this time, it wasn't the soft whisper of a presence. It was louder, more direct. A voice, familiar yet foreign, pierced the air. "I know you remember." It wasn't a question, it was a statement. The figure took a step forward, and with it, the air felt even thicker, as though it were pushing against them, urging them to run. But they couldn't move. The sensation of being watched became almost suffocating. Every instinct screamed to flee, to escape, but they remained rooted to the spot, helpless. The room felt smaller now, and the figure, no longer just a shadow, was no longer alone. There were others, standing just beyond the edge of perception. It wasn't a nightmare. It was real. It was happening now. And in that moment, the full weight of the situation hit. There was no escape. The voice from the corner lingered in their mind long after the words faded. "I know you remember." Those words, sharp and chilling, turned over and over in their head, slicing through the fragile calm that had once existed. But there was something more than just the voice. There was a presence, a weight in the room that they couldn't escape. The figure's slow approach felt like time itself had warped, bending to its will. They tried to move, to scream, to do anything, but nothing happened. The air was thick with an oppressive force, pressing them further into the corner. The whispering in the dark grew louder, louder, until it was no longer a whisper at all. "You left me behind, but I never left you." The figure stepped closer, its feet scraping against the floor, a sound that cut through their very soul. The shadows stretched longer as the figure grew nearer. Every inch it moved, heightening the terror. "We're not finished," it said. And then, silence. The air in the room crackled, an unnatural chill settling into their bones. Their chest tightened, the breaths coming faster, shallow. The figure's words, still ringing in their ears, refused to be silenced. "We're not finished." What did it mean? What was it talking about? The memories surged, images flickering in their mind like fragments of a broken film reel, half-formed, disconnected, painful. They had left something behind, hadn't they? Something or someone. They couldn't remember. But the figure, no, it was right. The past wasn't done with them. As the realization hit, the room seemed to close in, the walls pressing against them like the fingers of some unseen hand. Panic rose, and still, the figure remained motionless, watching. The closer it got, the clearer its features became, though they were no less terrifying. They were trapped, and there was no escape. No place left to run. With every step the figure took, their heart raced faster, their mind spiraling further into panic. What was this thing? What did it want? The words were impossible to grasp. But there was one thing that burned bright in the chaos of their thoughts. It knew them. It knew everything about them. The memories they had tried to bury, the mistakes they'd made, all the things they'd thought they'd forgotten. "You left me behind." The words cut deeper now, each syllable leaving a scar in their mind. A sudden bone-chilling cold swept over the room as the figure stood directly in front of them, its eyes locking with theirs. And then the figure whispered, "You never really left me." A surge of panic overtook them, and instinct took over. They finally moved, throwing themselves toward the door, but it was too late. The air was too thick, too heavy. It pressed against them, making every movement feel like wading through mud. The door was just within reach, but the shadows closed in faster than they could run. Days passed, but the feeling of being watched never left. Every room seemed smaller, the walls closer. Every sound felt too loud. And still, the figure lingered in their mind, haunting their every waking moment. They tried to dismiss it, tried to tell themselves it was just a bad dream, but the deep sense of dread clung to them like a second skin. A figure in the corner. A voice that knew too much. "I know you remember." That sentence replayed over and over in their mind, a constant loop that gnawed at their sanity. They couldn't shake the feeling that they were being hunted, pursued by something they couldn't see but could feel, pressing in from all sides. The memories were fragmented, broken, but they knew this much: there was something they had forgotten, something they had lost long ago. The truth was out there, lurking just beyond the surface, but the harder they tried to grasp it, the further it slipped from their reach. The unease only grew worse as they tried to continue with their daily routine. It was as if the world around them had shifted, the familiar turned alien, and every glance over their shoulder was met with empty spaces and shadows. But they knew. They knew that something was wrong. Something had changed. In an attempt to find a semblance of normalcy, they went out for a walk one evening. The streets were quiet, too quiet. The streetlights flickered intermittently, casting eerie, uneven patches of light across the sidewalk. As they passed the old church, they heard it, a whisper, faint but unmistakable. "You can't run." It was the same voice from the room, the one that had haunted their every thought. Their heart raced as they quickened their pace, but the footsteps behind them quickened as well. Every corner they turned seemed to lead them back to the same place, as if the city itself was folding in on them. There was no escape. That night, they couldn't sleep. Every time their eyes closed, their mind was filled with fragmented images. Flashes of a place they didn't recognize, faces they couldn't recall, a memory just out of reach. They tossed and turned, desperately trying to make sense of it all. But the harder they tried, the more elusive the truth became. In the darkness they could feel the weight of the past pressing down on them, suffocating them. Suddenly a sharp knock at the door shattered the stillness. Their hearts skipped a beat as they cautiously approached, every instinct screaming to turn and run. But they couldn't. The door creaked open, revealing a man standing in the doorway, his face familiar, yet unrecognizable. He smiled faintly, as though he knew something they didn't. "We need to talk," he said, his voice calm but heavy with unspoken meaning. And in that moment, they knew the truth was closer than they had ever imagined. The man stepped inside, his presence filling the small room like a storm. His eyes scanned the surroundings quickly, landing on the protagonist with an intensity that felt almost predatory. "I know you're confused," he said, his voice low and deliberate. "But I'm here to help you understand." His words hung in the air, heavy with an underlying threat. They didn't trust him. Not entirely. But something about him felt familiar, as if they had met before, though they couldn't place when or where. He motioned for them to sit, but they remained standing, every muscle in their body tense, ready to flee at any moment. The man's gaze softened, just slightly, as he took a step forward. "What you've been running from, it's not over. It's just beginning." The words didn't make sense, but they felt true. The fear surged again, hotter this time, as the truth began to creep into their mind like a slow poison. The man's words echoed in their mind long after he left. "It's just beginning." What did that mean? The fear that had been a constant companion now felt like a living, breathing thing, clinging to them, suffocating them with every step. They sat in silence for hours, staring at the door, wondering if he would return. What was he trying to tell me? The questions multiplied, but the answers were always just out of reach. The shadows in the room seemed to stretch longer, darker, as the night wore on. It felt as though the walls were closing in again, and the weight of the past was pressing harder than ever. What was I running from? The question played on repeat in their mind. And suddenly they understood. They weren't just running from the past. They were running from themselves. The realization hit like a punch to the gut. They were in deeper than they had ever realized. There was no escape now. The tension in the air was palpable, thick with the weight of unsaid things. The figure from the shadows still haunted their every thought, its voice echoing in their mind. But it was the man who had come to see them that night, the man who claimed to know them, that had left a new scar on their heart. He wasn't just a stranger. He knew too much, had seen too much. The way he spoke, the familiarity in his eyes, it felt like they had been connected long before that moment. They tried to distance themselves from him, to ignore the gnawing feeling that he was hiding something. But as days passed, the unease grew stronger. The whispers became more frequent, the shadows longer. There was a deeper connection here, one they couldn't escape. It wasn't just about the figure. The man, too, was part of this twisted web. But where did he fit? And why did he seem so insistent on them remembering things they had buried so deep? The next meeting was unavoidable. They had tried to convince themselves otherwise, to keep running, but the pull of the past was too strong. The man had promised answers, but each time they asked, the words seemed to evade them. "Why won't you just tell me the truth?" they demanded, standing before him in the same place where their paths had first crossed. His gaze was calm, almost patient, as though he had been expecting the question all along. "You're not ready," he replied simply. "The truth will shatter you." The words hit like a slap, and the room seemed to close in around them. Every instinct screamed to leave, but something in their gut told them they had to stay. The truth, whatever it was waiting, just on the other side of the door. They could almost hear it whispering, beckoning them forward, and despite the fear, despite the weight of it, they knew they had no choice but to follow. When the door finally opened, they were met with an empty hallway, silent, cold, and dark. Their heart pounded as they stepped forward, unsure of what awaited them. The building seemed abandoned, its walls creaking with age and neglect. The only light came from flickering bulbs overhead, casting harsh shadows on the walls. They walked quickly, the sound of their footsteps echoing in the hollow space. As they turned a corner, they saw him, the man, standing at the end of the hallway, his back to them. He was looking down at something in his hands, something they couldn't see. "I didn't want you to find out this way," he said, his voice low and almost regretful. "But you need to understand what you're really dealing with." The words were enough to stop them in their tracks. There was something ominous in the air now, something they couldn't ignore. The truth was closer than ever, but it felt like it would burn them alive if they touched it. The man turned slowly, his eyes meeting theirs with a mixture of sorrow and something darker. "You're not who you think you are," he said, his voice carrying a weight that seemed to settle over them like a heavy fog. "Your past, your whole life, it's been a lie." The words struck like lightning, splitting the air with their force. The world around them seemed to shudder, the ground beneath their feet unsteady. They tried to respond, to ask questions, but no words came. The man stepped closer, the faint light casting sharp shadows across his face. "You've been running from the truth your whole life, but you can't run anymore." He placed something in their hands, a small, unmarked envelope. "Open it," he commanded, his eyes locking with theirs. In that moment, they realized they had no choice but to open it. Whatever it contained, it was the key to everything, to understanding the past, and perhaps, to understanding themselves. They opened the envelope with trembling hands, pulling out a single photograph. Their breath caught in their throat as they stared at the image. An old, faded picture of themselves, standing with a group of people they didn't recognize. The photograph was taken years ago, when they were just a child. But it wasn't the image that made their hearts stop, it was the faces of the people in the photo. The man was in it. The others were strangers. And then there was someone else, someone whose face they couldn't fully make out, but whose eyes seemed all too familiar. The realization hit them like a tidal wave. This was no coincidence. This was planned. They had been part of something much darker than they could ever have imagined. They looked up at the man, their throat dry, the weight of the truth pressing down on them. "What does this mean?" they whispered. He didn't answer. He didn't have to. The answer was already there, staring them in the face. The weight of the photograph in their hand felt unbearable, like it was holding them to the ground. They couldn't look away from the faces, each one an unfamiliar puzzle piece they could not fit together. The man standing across from them watched silently, his face unreadable. "You have to understand, you were never supposed to remember this," he said quietly, his voice carrying the heavy burden of years of secrets. "This is bigger than you, bigger than anyone." They tried to speak, to ask him what he meant, but the words stuck in their throat. The realization hit them like a sharp sting. Their life, the one they thought they knew, was a lie. They were part of something they couldn't comprehend, something that had been buried, hidden from them for years. "You've been kept in the dark for your own protection," the man continued. "But the time has come for you to face the truth. It's all connected." The room seemed to shrink as the man's words continued to resonate in their mind. It's all connected. What did that even mean? Every instinct told them to flee, to run from this twisted reality that had started to unravel. But they couldn't move. They were paralyzed by the suffocating truth that was slowly suffusing every corner of their being. "You were part of a program," the man finally said, his tone cold and distant. "A program designed to erase your past and rewrite your future." Their mind raced, trying to process the words, but they couldn't understand. The pieces of their life, their memories, had been ripped away and replaced with something false, something they had no control over. "Your memories were never yours," he continued. "They were implanted. And now the truth is here, waiting for you to remember it all." They couldn't breathe, couldn't think straight. Their entire world had been shattered in an instant. "Why would you do this to me?" They managed to whisper, the words barely escaping their lips. The man sighed, his eyes darkening with something like regret, though it was hard to tell if it was genuine. "You were a weapon," he explained, his voice tinged with bitterness. "A creation. A tool for something much bigger than your personal life. Your real identity, your true self. Those were erased to make way for the perfect version of you." The words cut deep, each one a blade that carved deeper into the raw wound of their self-awareness. They had been lied to, manipulated and used. They were nothing but a puppet in someone else's grand scheme. "But now you're free," he said softly. "You have a choice now. You can either face who you truly are, or you can continue living the lie." The silence between them grew suffocating, and the weight of his words pressed down harder. The truth was impossible to deny, but they couldn't bring themselves to accept it. They felt betrayed by everything they had known. Every memory, every moment that had felt real was nothing but an illusion. "What am I then?" they asked, their voice cracking under the strain. "What was the point of all of this?" The man's face softened for the first time. "You were a part of an experiment," he admitted. "A social experiment. Your memories were altered to control you, to make you believe in something that wasn't real. But there's more. Something you need to see to remember." He stepped toward them, holding out a small metallic object. It looked like a key. "This will unlock everything," he said quietly. "All of it, your past, your true self, and the people who did this to you." Their hands shook as they reached for the key, but something inside them, the same instinct that had driven them this far, urged them to take it. With a trembling grip, they accepted the key, feeling its cold surface against their skin. "Do you remember now?" the man asked, his voice low and urgent. The question echoed in their mind as the key felt heavier in their hand, as if it was pulling them towards something they couldn't escape. "Everything is about to change," the man continued. "This is the moment you've been waiting for." And as they stared at the key, the truth began to surface, piece by piece, the shattered fragments of their memories slowly coming together. But the more they remembered, the more the truth became clear. There was no going back. The person they had been was gone. They were no longer the person they thought they were. The key had unlocked something deep inside, but it also sealed their fate. Whatever came next, It would be the final chapter in a life they never truly lived. The key felt heavy in their pocket as they walked down the darkened hallway, the air thick with anticipation. Every step they took was another step into the unknown. Another moment where the truth, once so elusive, now pressed against them, suffocating them. The door ahead of them was ajar, a faint light seeping through the crack. They could feel it, the change, the shift, the inevitable pull of destiny. It was all here, all at once. The choice had been made. There was no turning back. Their fingers brushed the cold metal of the key, the very thing that would unlock everything they had ever been running from. The sound of their own breathing was loud in their ears as they stepped closer, each movement dragging them deeper into the nightmare they had never asked for but had always been part of. "This is it," they whispered to themselves. "This is where it ends." They turned the key in the lock, the sound of metal grinding against metal like a final countdown. The door creaked open slowly, and they stepped inside. The room beyond was empty, save for a single chair in the center. It was all too familiar, the sterile white walls, the cold impersonal light that seemed to flicker above them. But there was something else now. Something that wasn't there before. On the floor, etched into the tile, was a symbol, a circle with strange markings that seemed to pulse with an otherworldly energy. They felt it before they saw it. A presence. The shadows in the room shifted, and from the corner of the room, the man stepped forward. His face was no longer neutral but twisted with something darker, something predatory. "Welcome back," he said with a smile that sent a chill through their spine. "You're too late," the man said, his voice low and dangerous. "The cycle has already begun. All of this. It was never meant to be stopped." The words hit like a punch to the gut, but they refused to falter. They stepped forward, their heart pounding in their chest, hands clenched into fists. "What are you talking about?" they demanded, their voice shaky but full of determination. The man's smile only deepened. "You were part of something much bigger than yourself. You were always meant to be the final piece, the one who would complete the experiment." His words were like daggers, each one cutting deeper into the truth they had been avoiding for so long. "But it's too late. You can't change it now. The plan has already been set in motion." The room felt like it was closing in, and their breath quickened, but there was no turning back. The revelation was too much to bear, but there was no time to process it now. There was only one thing left to do. Suddenly, a flash of memory surged through their mind, a vision of a place they had once known, a face they had once trusted. The fragments of their past collided with the present, and for a moment they were lost in the flood of images. But then the clarity came, sharp and undeniable. They understood. They understood what the man had meant. Everything, the memories, the lies, the manipulation, it all clicked into place. They had been part of a larger game, a plan that had been set in motion long before they had any say in the matter. But they weren't just a pawn. They were the key, the final piece. And the power to stop it all was in their hands. The realization burned through them like wildfire. The truth had always been within reach, buried deep inside, waiting for the right moment. And now, it was time to take control. "I'm not part of your plan," they said, their voice steady, filled with newfound resolve. "I'll make my own destiny." With a surge of power, they took control of the key in their hand, feeling its weight shift from something cold and heavy to something of immense power. The room seemed to tremble as they stepped forward, their gaze fixed on the man. "This ends now." They could feel the surge of energy building within them, the truth of their own power finally igniting. The man lunged at them, but they were ready. With a swift motion, they raised their hand, and the air seemed to crackle with energy. The man froze, his eyes widening in disbelief. The truth had set them free. The plan had never been about control. It had always been about choice. And now, they were making their own. The room around them began to crack and shudder, the walls splitting apart as the man's figure flickered and faded. In the end, it was not the man who held the power, but them. The darkness fell away, and with it the weight of the past. The truth had been revealed, and with it, their freedom. The world around them seemed to slow, the heavy weight of their actions settling deep into their bones. The light from the broken walls illuminated the space, but the brightness felt harsh now, almost unbearable. The room, once a prison, now felt like a place of rebirth. They had broken free, but at what cost? The man was gone, his figure dissolved into the darkness. The symbols on the floor were gone too, as if the very foundation of everything they had known was crumbling beneath them. They stood in the wreckage of their past, unsure of what to do next. The truth had been revealed, but the world outside remained unchanged. They could feel the pull of the future, but it wasn't clear yet what path they would take. The weight of everything, the lies, the manipulations, the choices they had made, was heavy, but they couldn't afford to dwell on it. The past was behind them now. The future was what mattered. They stepped outside into the cold air. The night sky stretched above them like an endless ocean. The world had never felt so vast, so full of possibility. It was overwhelming. They had always been so focused on surviving, on escaping, that they had never stopped to truly live. Now, with the weight of their newfound freedom pressing against them, they realized how fragile their existence had been. They had been trapped in a cycle, a never-ending loop of deceit and manipulation. But now, they were free. Free to make their own choices, to write their own story. And though the future was uncertain, they knew one thing for sure: they had the power to shape it. The road ahead was theirs to take, and it was up to them to decide where it would lead. The shadows of their past would always be with them, but they no longer controlled their fate. For the first time, they were in control. As they walked through the quiet streets, the city around them felt unfamiliar, as if they were seeing it for the first time. Every corner, every building, held a memory, a piece of their past they could no longer escape. But it didn't feel like a prison anymore. It felt like home. The people around them moved in a blur, their lives playing out in patterns the protagonist once followed, but now observed with a sense of detachment. They had become a stranger in their own world, and yet there was something freeing about it. The weight of the past had been lifted, and while the scars remained, they no longer defined them. They were no longer a victim of their own story. They were the author. The narrative was in their hands, and for the first time, they could choose the direction it would go. And though the future was uncertain, the protagonist now understood that it was theirs to shape. They paused at a park bench, the stillness of the night settling around them. Their fingers brushed against the surface of the key in their pocket, the last tangible reminder of the life they had left behind. The key was no longer something to be feared. It was a symbol of their strength, a reminder of their journey. They had unlocked their past, but it was no longer something they needed to hold on to. It was the future that mattered now. With a deep breath, they stood up, the weight of the decision settling in. The world was waiting, full of opportunities, full of potential. They could go anywhere, be anyone. It was all in their hands now. They didn't know where the road would lead, but they knew it was their road to travel. And with that they walked into the night, the path ahead uncertain but full of promise. As the protagonist walked away from the park, the city's hum seemed distant, fading into the background as they moved forward. They no longer felt burdened by the past, no longer haunted by the choices they had once feared. The world was wide open, and for the first time they were truly free. The steps they took were theirs and theirs alone, each one echoing with the possibility of something new. They didn't know what the future held, but they had learned that the power to shape it was within them. They had broken free of the chains that had once bound them, and now they were free to live, to love, and to experience the world on their own terms. The key had unlocked the truth, but it was their choice that would define who they would become. And in that moment, they understood the journey was only just beginning. The world around them was silent, a silence that felt like the calm after a storm. They had walked so far, come so much closer to the truth, and yet, in this moment, there was a sense of finality, an understanding that they were no longer running. They were no longer a passenger in their own life. Their footsteps echoed in the vast emptiness of the night, but it didn't feel lonely. The past was a shadow, slowly fading as the first light of dawn began to seep over the horizon. For the first time in so long, they could breathe without the weight of fear in their chest. The journey had been long, full of revelations that had torn them apart, only to rebuild them stronger. The person they had been was gone. The person they had become was still uncertain, but that was no longer a source of fear. It was freedom. And with that, they stepped forward, knowing the truth had set them free. There was something about the morning light that felt like a promise. The city, once oppressive, now seemed filled with possibility, its familiar streets feeling new and unexplored. Each step they took was more sure, more confident, as if the very act of moving forward was rewriting their story. They could feel the weight of everything they had overcome, the scars they bore. But now, those scars felt like badges of honor. They had faced darkness, had confronted the parts of themselves they never wanted to acknowledge. But now they were free to define who they would be. The future was no longer something to fear, but something to shape with intention. They had found the strength to walk away from the past, to sever the ties that once bound them. And as they walked, the city around them seemed to breathe, to come alive, ready to welcome them into the new chapter they had yet to write. The street was alive now, the city waking from its slumber. But even in the bustling crowd, the protagonist felt a quiet sense of isolation. It wasn't loneliness, it was independence. They had walked away from everything they had known, and now they stood at the threshold of a new life, uncertain but empowered. They could feel the shift within themselves, the internal transformation that had taken place in the darkness, in the confrontation with their past. But now that the past had been dealt with, the future felt open, wide, endless, full of unknowns. But for the first time, that uncertainty felt thrilling. No longer bound by the fears of what they didn't know, they could step into the unknown with confidence. The city, once overwhelming, now felt like an open landscape, ready to be explored. They didn't need all the answers. They only needed to keep moving forward. As they reached the edge of the city, the skyline behind them seemed to recede, becoming smaller and smaller until it was just a distant silhouette against the vast expanse of the open world. The world stretched out before them, endless, full of possibilities. They felt no fear, only a deep sense of gratitude for everything that had led them to this moment. Every painful memory, every revelation, every twist in their journey had been necessary. They were who they were because of it all. And now, standing on the precipice of the unknown, they knew that whatever came next, they would be ready. The past could no longer hold them, and the future, however uncertain, was theirs to claim. And as the wind picked up, they stepped forward into the horizon, feeling the rush of freedom and the weight of destiny in every step they took. The city, the past, the journey, everything had led them here. And as they took that final step into the unknown, they understood. The journey was never about finding the answers. It was about becoming the person they were always meant to be. The truth was not something that could be given or taken. It was something that had to be claimed. They had done that. They had found their strength. And now, as they disappeared into the distance, they could hear the soft sound of their own breath, steady and sure, a quiet affirmation of all they had overcome. A whisper in the dark, the end of one story and the beginning of another.